Are they really having an election campaign in Germany? That's what many people ask here in Brussels in the last day because it's so calm. But I assure you, they are having an election campaign, and that election has repercussions, not only for Germany, but the whole of the European Union. And we will debate here at the European Parliament in Brussels which repercussions exactly that will have. But before we do that with the European parliamentarians that are here with me today, let me remind you of what's at stake and whom we're talking about.
She's defined the European Union more than any other politician in the last decade. The Queen of Europe, Angela Merkel. She tried to weather the financial crisis from 2008 onwards. She's been dealing with the migration crisis since 2015. Now she's redefining Europe's role in the world without the United Kingdom and with a different kind of America. In the process, she's increased Germany's influence in the EU, but also created resistance and opponents. Is she still the right politician to lead Germany in the EU? Or is her opponent, a seasoned EU parliamentarian, perhaps the better choice for Europe? Angela Merkel versus Martin Schulz is not only a German story, it's a battle that will also define the EU for years to come.
So to discuss this, we have 5 EU parliamentarians here with me. And the idea, of course, was not to have any Germans here, but from other EU countries. So let me introduce them quickly. To my left here, Tanja Fajon from Slovenia with the Social Democrats. And she says, with Martin Schulz, Germany decides for a more democratic and fairer Europe closer to our citizens, which is precisely the Europe we need. Welcome. Now, next to Ms. Fajon, we have Dimitrios Papadimoulis from the European United Left, and he says austerity politics have failed to address the economic crisis in the Eurozone. It has caused a surge of far-right populism and growing social grievances. Over here, we have Philippe Lamberts from the Belgian Ecolo Party, of course, the European Greens, and he says, we certainly need a European Germany, not a German Europe. No one country has all the right answers. From the European People's Party, so the Christian Democrats, we have Mairead McGuinness, and she says stability in political leadership at a time of global uncertainty is something to be valued. It is an important bulwark against calls for change for the sake of change. And finally, over here to my right, we have Kosmas Watowski from the ruling...
Good evening.
From the ruling PS party in Poland. And he says, what we see now is more an invasion on Europe than a migration crisis. We have to regain control over external borders of the EU immediately. So let me start with you, Mr. Lamberts. What you're seeing in Germany, this election campaign, is there anything missing?
Well, it seems that no one is really questioning the fact that Germany would have indeed all the right answers. I mean, look, Germany is, of course, the Mittelstand and an extraordinarily inventive industry, but it is also cheating Volkswagen, it is cheating Deutsche Bank, it is also a policy that is actually not sustainable. I keep saying to Germans, you know, you want everyone to do like Germany, but then when we will all have an 8 or 9% surplus, to whom? Are we going to sell to the Martians or what? I mean, this is simply not possible. And so at the point in Germany, I'd like to see the real questions asked. For instance, we want a monetary union, right? And Germany has been a monetary union long before the Eurozone was. Well, Germany, 150 years after its unification, it's still not a homogeneous country, which means that there is financial solidarity between the 16 regions in Germany, and actually 3 are net contributors.
Right. So what would you like to see exactly on the table? If you
I'd like to see proposals to make the euro viable. I would like to see the same kind of boldness that Chancellor Merkel showed with the Energiewende on the car industry, for instance, saying, OK, let's bet on the future, not on the past. And on energy, reluctantly, to be honest, she did that. But she hardly considers it for the car industry, which seems to be a sacred cow in Germany. And, well, I'd like to see a bit more energy in the campaign around these themes.
Ms. McGuinness, you're, of course, the same party as current Chancellor Angela Merkel. Do you agree with that? I mean, if you talk about the car industry, for example, he says it's really missing. But, of course, on the other hand, you have 800,000 jobs depending on that in Germany. Yeah. So what's your take on that?
Two observations. Firstly, it's certainly not missing in the debate, because what I followed of the debate is that the car industry is very much central to the debate. But obviously, what the Chancellor is doing is dealing with it in a very managed way, rather than perhaps a radical way, which might impact on the people who actually are living off the car industry and support the sector.
Of the car industry.
Yes, and I don't disagree that the industry does need to address its deficiencies, but it has to be done, as the Chancellor said, in a staged way. To your point, as you introduced, whether we're aware there's an election in Germany, of course we're aware. But I think we also have to acknowledge that elections in member states are about national and local issues in general, that European issues, we would like perhaps them to be raised to that level. But even in European elections, we find very often that the issues that are debated are national. But clearly the issues and the results of the German election, and whatever formation the coalition we will have, does have an impact on European politics and on European policy. So when you ask what's missing, I think we're going to see a more vigorous campaign now, because really we're 3 weeks from the actual date of the vote, and therefore in that period of time I expect the energy levels and the depth of debate, if you like, to deepen and intensify. But if you look across the issues, they've addressed Turkey, the car industry is on the agenda, migration is on the agenda.
But
there are so many issues.
It's been a lot about foreign policy now. If you looked at the debate in Germany, for example, Mr. Złotowski, they talked about North Korea, they talked about Turkey a lot. So do you think that's the right angle? Are you surprised by that angle?
Well, there are no differences between main actors in German campaign, between Social Democrats and Chancellor Merkel, because she still postulates of Social Democrats. For instance, the Ehe für alle, the marriage for all, it was a postulate of Social Democrats, and it was made by Mrs. Chancellor. So she has made CDU as a social democratic party.
Isn't that a smart thing? She's winning all the time.
Yes, and both actors are the same. The debate we could see 2 days ago, it was not a debate, but it was a discussion between a chancellor and her vice-chancellor.
Tanja Fajon, you know Martin Schulz very well, same party. He was the European parliamentarian president. So what kind of chancellor would he be? Does he really have what it takes to do a better job than Angela Merkel in your eyes?
Thank you for this question, because it reminded me on the times when Martin Schulz was the president of the European Parliament, and I think we can all agree here that this institution got a face, got a credibility and a power in the Council. So looking on this history, when he was the president of the institution, I miss today this leadership of the institution. I can imagine that he could also bring the content to the discussion and bring the face in a different way. What you said, and other colleagues, it's very much prevailing foreign politics, migration in the discussion, Turkey in the discussion, North Korea, it's logical. It has an effect on what is happening in Europe and in the world. But what I missed in the discussion is, for example, more on education, more on domestic topics, youth policy. So these are issues that, especially in the last debate, I was surprised to see was not mentioned. But if you ask me about the Germany and maybe Martin Schulz being as a leader, I would certainly like to see ending of austerity measures. We see in the past, Greece is a good example. After 8 years of austerity measures, Greece is still having a very bad economic results. And for example, this dominant role of Germany in the European Union, high profits are also weakening countries that are smaller countries of the European Union. So we need to find better balances in the reform also when it comes to completing the banking union and so on.
Mr. Papadimoulis, would you like to see the austerity topic, more investment to be on the agenda in Germany more than it is at the moment? I assume you probably would, right?
There is not only my demand. is an increasing social demand because we have rising inequalities not only inside the European Union, but also inside Germany.
Absolutely.
And also Commission and the Council are blaming the German economy for huge surpluses, which is equally illegal with the huge deficits. And that creates the huge deficits in the European South. I want that elections to improve the idea that European Union is something different than a scene in which 28 members are discussing and Germany decides itself.
What can Germany learn from Greece in this campaign?
I think that Greece is not a part of that campaign, and this is good for Greece because Greece is recovering after 8 years of a tough austerity. But I want to see the German leadership after the elections to become more European. I want to see, and I think that it's good not only good for Europe, but also for the German interests. I want to see a more European Germany than a German Europe, because the rising inequalities, regional, social, are putting in danger the unification process. And we need political union and economic union, not only a monetary union.
So to me, that sounds a little like also a call for a little less German dominance, maybe a little more European Germany. That's also what you said, Mr. Lamberts. And because we've been hearing a lot about German dominance in the last years, really, with France being a weaker partner. And but it seems really that Germany can't get it right. You know, if they do more, then maybe many say they're overpowering the union. If they do little, then they say they're not taking their responsibility.
Germany, the powerhouse of the EU. It's the undisputed #1 economy in the Union. And money is power. Germany's been pushing its visions for the Eurozone, trade and foreign policy. With a weakened France on the sidelines for many years, there was no one to seriously defy Merkel and her ministers. This might change with the new French President Macron and the revival of the French-German engine. Still, nothing significant happens without Germany. A delicate role given its history. How much German leadership does the rest of the EU really need? And how much does it want?
Mr. Złotowski, how much German leadership do you want?
Well, I think the European community was founded because the people of Europe wanted to avoid any leadership, any national leadership in Europe. And, well, now we can see the German domination, and I'd like to avoid any leadership. The European Union is a union of discussion and making common decision, not making a decision because of the leader.
Would you, Ms. McGuinness, would you see a European Union like we just heard actually functioning?
Well, I'm trying to interpret exactly what you mean, but let's look at it as it is today. We still are 28 member states, and they all have leaders. I have a leader of our country. Equally, you all have leaders. And I think the question you're posing and presenting is that Germany has too much weight. But Germany is a big country and a big economy. And to some extent, what I have valued about Chancellor Merkel is that while she is this very formidable leader, I feel she's very much rooted in her community. And I do think she understands the complexities of people's lives. And her strength is that she does not seek to be different. We have a world where, if you like, there are so many new leaders who are shiny and bright and different, and some of them are too different. Chancellor Merkel represents a stability which I think Europe needs, but there is also a challenge to the others around the table, the 27, perhaps not 27, 26, to be stronger if they feel, one of them or all of them, that the German machine is too strong. It is not that anyone's voice is weakened. For example, I'm a member from Ireland. there are very few. I mean, there are 11 Irish members in this Parliament. It doesn't mean that my voice is weakened by that size.
Yeah, but
it means I have to be more effective, perhaps.
Yeah,
So,
I agree with that.
yeah.
But then again, it's not about strength. I don't want to weaken Germany in any way. But I'd like maybe to avoid arrogance. And let me refer to another German leader, and that's Wolfgang Schäuble, of course. Mr. I know everything. Mr. I know better than you what you need to do. And by the way, this kind of finger pointing, he can very well do. I'm sorry to say that Mr. Schäuble has still a lot to learn about how the economy functions and how a monetary union functions.
So would you take a Merkel government without Schäuble, preferably?
Well, I'm not sure that we are going to get that anytime soon. The point I want to make is that the difference between leadership, which I praise, because actually I don't want any country to lead on its own. But I want leadership. I want collective leadership. And indeed, how should I say, the weight that Germany carries currently in European affairs is as much to be attributed to a renewed German assertiveness. I would say that the days of World War II and, would I say, paying for the sins of World War II are over, and that's a good thing. But it's not just that Germany is more assertive, it's, as you say, that I'd like to hear from the other 27. They have to stand up for what they believe is right, and no one has all the truth. So I want collective leadership, and indeed, to some extent, I mean, look at the refugee crisis. Of course, I disagree with our Polish colleague. One must recognize that Chancellor Merkel has had leadership. And you might say, okay, well, she didn't consult with the others, but let's be serious. If she went to Hollande at the time, do you think that Hollande would have said, okay, I'm with you, wir schaffen das, on en est capable. We do that together. No, he would not have done that. So at least she stood up to a historic responsibility of Europe, not just Germany. Europe. And she didn't find very much help.
And we're going to talk, we'll talk about that later a little more. We have a whole block dedicated to migration. But Mr. Papadimoulis, would you say that the days of World War II are truly over? Because sometimes during the financial crisis, when we had this debate of austerity versus investment, there was a feeling in Greece, okay, we're going back to well, maybe not totally the old days, but the Germans are just completely pushing us into something. Is that over now? How do you feel about that?
I think that the bigger danger is that austerity policy creates the ground for the improvement of the extreme right, of the populism of the extreme right. And it's a pity, an historical pity, to go back to nationalism, to the extreme right, trying to find solutions for austerity or for dignity or for security. So I think that it's an historical mistake for Germany to forget the recent history, the First and the Second War. The European unification process is the big idea, the big progressive project. And if we have to go on with that project more successfully to become that project more attractive for the people and for the young people, it's important to strengthen that engine with sustainable growth, with cohesion, with political leadership, democratic, transparent, collective.
We always hear those words, more inclusive government and all, but what does it actually mean to you?
That means more Europe in economic policy, the communitarian method.
You have a concrete measure
Stronger
you would like the Germans to suggest, something detailed.
For example, to give more money to strengthen the internal demand, to increase the salaries and the pensions in Germany. That could have a positive impact not only for the German society, but also for the European economy.
You know who said something similar?
They have the space, the fiscal space to do it. And the Commission and the Council are asking the German government, and I want a German government more European, more open-minded. It's important for the German leadership to understand that the 2/3 of the German exports are going to the European South. If the European South collapses,
no more exports. You know, there's a man who said something similar, and he's, of course, a candidate in this German election campaign. And in 2010, Martin Schulz said this.
Germany is a strong country and has massive influence here, but we don't need to demonstrate that like Mrs. Merkel has done, because at some point, this will strike back.
Are we at the point, Tanja Fajon, where this is striking back?
I can give you an example, just listening to this statement. Portugal today, where socialists are in the government, went against austerity measures. Now, 2 years approximately, they're having very good economic results. They're investing in jobs and economic growth, and I think that can be a good example in comparison with Greece and what happened in the last 8 years on austerity. So I think Germany, as I mentioned before, I just read a very good article of, I think, Cypriot Nobel Peace winner, who said big profits that Germany is creating an economy and dominance, it can go on the damage of smaller economies. And if that will continue with that pace, we will destroy Europe and the balances in Europe. Yep. So we really have to reform that way. And here I think the politics of Angela Merkel of the last few years, going extremely to austerity, it is true that it's the strongest European economy. But I think this is something that really is damaging some other economies.
I think austerity is an overused word, I think, for many economies. And remember, Ireland went through a particularly
I would say it's an overused policy.
But just if I may finish the point
Please
before you argue with me, just to say that others would regard it as managing your economy. But I think there is an issue about surplus and deficits and a balance across Europe. And I think if I listen to the debate well in Germany, there is a need for infrastructural spending in Germany, that in schools, in bridges, in train stations. This is an issue for many member states. And I think what we need to do is perhaps learn the lessons of the past, because even in my own country, we're again seeing a problem around housing. But to the point about Germany and the war and history, my biggest fear is that any of us would forget about our history, both World War I and World War II. And Mr. Papadimoulis, you rightly mentioned young people. They're perhaps the most pro-European, but perhaps don't have the memory of war and our evil past, if you like. And today, with Brexit happening, I think we need to look to history, but also to try and paint a picture of a Europe that does look after everybody, including the environment, because I think that's across all policies. Perhaps it's not happening at the pace some people would like and the manner it would like, but I would hope that because of Brexit, that the EU 27 would be united towards a vision of looking after citizens.
I think this is too nice a presentation, because to be honest, if you want change, you need pressure. And of course, I can argue it the Schäuble way. If we want to see change in Greece, we need to put the country under pressure. And I see people like Schäuble being very enthusiastic, maximizing pressure to get change. Now, what I realize is that when we want change from the industry, suddenly the will to put pressure is much less. When it comes to shareholders, when it comes to so-called investors, people who are speculators, the political will to put them under pressure. The same Mr. Schäuble is someone who opposes transparency for multinationals. He doesn't want the German multinationals to have to say where they book their profits and where they pay their taxes. That is too much for Mr. White Knight. And this I really I don't understand. Much discipline for these lousy governments, but no discipline at all for big German business. Big German business. I mean, against non-German business, no problem. But German mega firms are holy. They can't be touched. And that is something that I just cannot hear any longer from Germany.
I just wanted to point out still something else on the leadership. If you look to today's reality, every decision that we are doing here, every politics that we are doing in Brussels, it is done by phone calling to Berlin. This is the reality today. I don't want to see, but I agree with you, the weaker role of German leadership, not at all. But here we come to the other discussion we are currently having. What kind of Europe do we want in future? And the equalities back between the member states. Here I see a lot of gaps in current discussion, but this is another topic. Still, this dominance of Germany is here. We need it, but we need a strong leadership that is not only a German leadership.
No. And we don't need the final decision from Berlin. The decision should be common.
But I don't think any of the other leaders who are sitting around the table with Chancellor Merkel also want that presentation. So sometimes if we repeat something, it becomes reality. And if it were the case, it would suggest, as I previously said, that the others need to be tougher, because at the end of the day, at the end of the day, this is a communion, if you like, or a union of countries voluntarily coming together.
Here we come to the debate.
And therefore, I don't think there's any disagreement. We might disagree on the nuances of policy and many things, but on this point, it is up to all countries to be strong at the table. And
how
it is
does,
very difficult.
how does Brexit, for example, change that balance of power?
Brexit is the most profound event, I think, politically for a long number of years. And of course, I would say that because I'm close physically. My constituency, for example, borders with Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom. And Brexit represents a break from the past, which was an enlargement process. It's a major country that's leaving, and the manner of its leaving to date troubles me greatly, because I don't see progress being made on the three key issues that are on the table. And we see the clock ticking, as Michel Barnier says,
and how does it change the balance of power without the UK?
I think it's up to the 27 to reorientate themselves. You either decide to allow Brexit weaken you, which might cheer up some people, or you decide that it will strengthen you because you've seen what can happen by perhaps neglect.
I think that Brexit puts another crucial challenge for Europe as a whole and for the German leadership and for the new German government. It obliged every one of the remaining member states to stay united, and that put the pressure to the German leadership to hear more the voices from the other member states and from the European South, and also put the pressure to the new German Chancellor after the elections to reinvest in the French-German alliance for boosting the unification process. Until now, using the UK, Germany had a minimalization in its approach about the unification process. Now, it's important to put again the engines of that French-German coalition, but going on the unification process with social agenda, environmental agenda, cohesion agenda, investment agenda.
Unification has been a problem on some topics, we have to say, though, and first and foremost, probably migration since the last 2 years. I mean, today is a big day, of course, for this issue, because we had the European Court of Justice saying that they upheld the right to force member states to take a quota of migrants in Poland. Of course, was against that, but of course also Hungary, Slovakia, and this is just the latest chapter really in a story that's been going on at least since 2015. And here's a short reminder what happened back then.
These pictures shook Europe to the core. And the member states reacted very differently. Angela Merkel opened Germany's borders to avoid a humanitarian crisis, applauded by her now campaign rival, Martin Schulz. But others started building fences and refused to take in migrants. The EU's refugee pact with Turkey slowed down the migration stream in the Western Balkans. But the dispute at the core of the EU remains. East versus West, a fundamental rift. What can a future German government do to resolve this issue that remains a threat to the EU?
Mr. Złotowski, this has been one of the major issues in Europe for the last 2 years, where the countries are definitely, or many countries, not on the same page, and Poland being very against taking in refugees. Now, does the situation in Poland, does your stance towards Germany change with the decision of the European Court of Justice saying it's okay to force member states to take in refugees?
It's not okay to force anybody to anything in United Europe. You cannot force some...
But this, I mean, this is a legal system, and this is a legal decision.
And there is a question about the migration. Is it a migration or is it an invasion?
An invasion, come on. I mean,
yes.
No, you have to look at the numbers.
You can have a social state, but 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 you And you can have open borders, but you cannot have them both.
Who is talking about open borders?
We have open borders now.
Come on, how dare you say this? I mean, this is fake news. Come on, this is fake news. Stop it.
No, it is not. We cannot control European borders now. We are not able to this, and we should be.
You mean there's too many Ukrainians coming into Poland? That's what you mean?
It's easier to control climate
so far
than
didn't
borders.
even
let's have him finish first and then react, all right?
If we can control borders, why there are so plenty of migrants in Greece or in
between irregular
Italy?
migration, between refugees.
All right, and let's start with Ms. Fajon and then go over to you.
I mean, first of all, today's decision of the European Court, I think, has a very, very significant meaning. The countries that are not doing solidarity approach, and it's very wrong to say that there is an invasion. Let us talk about the numbers. 1.5 million of people came to 500 million big
and
Europe.
He calls that an invasion.
There was just after the Second World War 12 million refugees in Germany itself. Now put numbers in the perspective and don't fear the citizens. 1.5 million for 500 million Europeans, it's nothing if there would be solidarity.
Poland, obviously.
We don't have a common migration policy that is effective and it is based on solidarity. Poland is the country that enjoys the biggest budget for agriculture, and it's not a la carte politics. And this is why this Europe today doesn't work when it should work.
Budget for agriculture enjoys Germany.
And the borders, by the way, work.
I think that the decision of the European Court of Justice is very positive, based on our common legal framework, and we have to remind everyone, including the Polish colleague, that the European Union is a framework of cooperation with rights and obligations. It is impossible to participate in a Europe a la carte, to need and to ask for the European money for your infrastructure, for your farmers, and not to implement unanimous decision of the Council, of the Commission, and of the Parliament. And the relocation program of the refugees is decided unanimously in the level of the Council, signed also from your government, from the Polish government, and you have to participate on that.
Yeah, I think that this issue is...
Plus to that, only one. Because of the geography and of the history, Greece and Italy are the gates of that flow. Why we have to pay the cost with a lack of solidarity from the European side?
Let me ask you a question, though. What would you, and maybe first with Mrs. Złotowski, what would you like the Germans to do here? I mean, we have a case that was dismissed, so the legal basis is clear. But you're using the arguments from before that case. But what would you like the Germans to do now? Go against what the European Court of Justice has decided?
But what is the solidarity? Solidarity is when we have common discussion and we make up the decision. And this decision about coming 1.5 million of migrants to Germany was made personally by Chancellor Merkel. She didn't ask anybody else. She made this decision. She was unsolidary.
But isn't it time to get over that and say, okay, maybe she made a mistake, but now we have to deal with it somewhat?
I mean, I think your report said, if I can quote it accurately, it was to avoid humanitarian disaster. So I think we need to be mindful of the circumstances then. I think we also should be mindful, with respect to your point of view, that this problem will escalate if we do not act for the long term. And to be fair, again, to Chancellor Merkel, in her national debate, she has raised this issue of working with Africa so that people who want to be where they're from are not forced for economic reasons or violence to leave their home territories. But we do need strong external borders of Europe. I don't think there's any argument around that. Europe was unprepared for what happened. I think Chancellor Merkel rightly stands over that decision, which was a brave decision at at the time, and there have been difficult consequences internally for her around that decision. But what were the choices? When you, again, and it's good that you show those photographs and those pictures of real people and children and women with newborn babies and worse fleeing, some of them for horrendous reasons of violence coming from their home member states. I do not want to be part of any community that says we close our eyes to this problem. I want to be part of a European Union that finds long-term solutions because, honestly, for my children and their children, it will be much worse if we do not act now in the long-term interest.
To let those people live in
but then
Syria
when there's war in your country,
in Africa, and
I agree with you. But when there's war in your country, do you think has Poland any solution to end the war in Syria? Come on, let's be serious. We will have war in the Middle East for the coming years.
We have European Union,
of course, and then by miracle, the European Union has a solution.
Mrs. Witowski, we've dwelled in the past now. I would like to know, what do you expect from the next German government on migration? What would you like them to do?
First, helping the people at the place. I mean, in
the countries of origin.
Yes.
Well, Syria, we think all agree it's going to be difficult.
Yes, it is difficult. But the war in Syria, it was also a big mistake of European Union. Not only Mr. Barack.
Let's go forward towards the solution.
Mr. Barack Obama, but also...
That's the past. Let's go for the solution.
That's the past.
You mean the European Union started the war in Syria?
No.
What do you mean then? What is the big mistake of the European Union?
The biggest mistake is, of course, of Mr. Obama.
I would like to come back to what can we do,
right?
what do you expect Germany to do now? Not what happened in the past, but for the future. Solutions.
And we must do everything to go those people back to their countries.
But refugees who are fleeing violence and terror cannot be sent back. We have a union of care. But secondly, economic migrants, I think there is an issue, which I have said, and we all agree, we need to look at our external borders. But don't for one moment, if you were those people living with nothing, with children who have nothing, no hope, no education, would you not also swim with them on your back so that they would have some security and safety? I think we all as human beings would. But we have to find long-term solutions.
There are refugees, and we must help to the refugees. But on the other hand...
I've yet to see Poland doing that.
There are...
economics, I agree.
Many refugees.
And we
went to Poland.
With
Would you tell us how many refugees were received from Poland?
Well, Mr. Hoffman,
how many? About 700,000 from Ukraine.
Zero, absolutely zero from Syria. Absolutely.
From Syria?
From
Syria.
Let's organize this a little bit. Yes. It's up to Ms. Fayon, next part.
Next part. What do I expect from Germany?
You were trying to say something.
I'm still maybe a bit too emotional about the debate. When we talk about migration, I am convinced we need a European solution. And not only, of course, we have to focus on Middle East, on Syria, on Africa. We are trying to do that, but if we don't do that together, with having solidarity, with having effective management of outside borders and also of migration, we will fail. And it's a shame for Europe that in the last 2 years we are losing a lot of confidence among the citizens because we are not effective in addressing the issues. And we have to bear in mind people are daily dying.
But I do think you raise an important point about citizens and fear around migration. And I think we have to be very careful because, you know, it shouldn't be linked with terrorism, but it becomes part of the same in the public mind. So we should avoid
something completely.
But on the other hand, while I disagree with your perspective, I think it is there in many member states, and we do have to address the political, if you like, fear that people have without dismissing it, because to some extent the rise of the extreme on the right and indeed sometimes on the left is because of this unaddressed fear that people have. And again, I think this is something that Europe has to do together. So I think we have slight common ground.
And I think one person who person who did that in the past, I will get right back to you, is of course the Chancellor herself. Let me give you a quote from 2016 from Angela Merkel, and you see how she has also changed on the migration policy in the last years.
One might think you learn by experience, so maybe things will get better now. But Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, They all have very low approval rates. We need to send a clear signal. Don't even come, you have no chance. That's the situation now with refugees from the Western Balkans. Hardly anyone comes anymore because everybody knows it doesn't make sense.
So that doesn't sound like the Angela Merkel from 2015, does it?
No, but then again, I mean, first things first. Angela Merkel opened the doors, and I agree with those who say she decided that unilaterally. I would claim that if she had brought that to the European Council, no one would have followed. But okay, you have a point there. Now, what she says about Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia, I think, is not right at the same moment, because you cannot claim that there's no person who would qualify as a refugee from these regimes. So if someone applies from these countries, well, his or her demand and applies for asylum, the Geneva Convention forces Germany or any other member state, including Poland, to examine his demand individually.
So let's get back to the question I asked Mr. Złotowski.
Yeah.
What should the Germans, as one of the leading nations in the European Union, do?
Well, I think Germany has already done a lot by showing that it is possible to welcome a significant number of people from outside, not without difficulties, because also I agree with you that no one should say piece of cake, easy. No, it's complex. I mean, when you have a peasant from Darfur arriving in France and integrating, it's hugely difficult, and we should recognize that. So we should not underestimate the difficulty. But again, what Germany has done has yet to be emulated by many other member states. I mean, no one comes close to what Germany has done. And therefore, I would expect Germany to encourage other member states to do likewise. The point where the representative from Poland may come in is the fact that these questions are difficult. And it's maybe too easy to say, just do it. And when the vote was taken in the Council to say, OK, we do this relocation plan within the European Union, and I know 4 countries voted against, and it's their right to vote against. They have legitimate government, you cannot dispute that. But again, majority wins, majority decided to do it. At that point in time, I felt maybe we should not have voted, and we should have had a coalition of the willing, and then we keep talking with Poland, we keep talking with Hungary, and we see whether we can find a way to find agreement.
I know we could go, you can really see there is no unity on this topic here yet, and there's no unity in the European Union, but we're almost out of time. There's one last thing I would like you to do. I'm sorry, we're out of time, Mrs. Złotowski. There is, and that is, I would like all of you just to say who you would vote for. You can say Merkel, or you can say Schulz. That's all you're allowed to say. So if you were allowed to vote in Germany.
Schulz.
Die Linke and the Progressive Alliance.
You have to say Merkel, Schulz. All right.
We have a multi-party
I'll be
democracy.
honest with you, because I know Martin Schulz very well, I would probably vote Merkel.
Okay, understood.
Merkel, Chancellor Merkel.
And?
Merkel.
All right, well, that's it. Thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you for following our debate live from Brussels.